Okay, ladies and gentlemen, so today we're going to talk about properties of rectangles and squares. You've already talked about parallelograms as well as rhombuses, or rhombi rather. So now let's go ahead and talk about rectangles and squares. First up is rectangles. Rectangles have all the same properties as a parallelogram. So your opposite angles are congruent, your opposite sides are congruent, your opposite sides are parallel, your consecutive angles add up to 180, and your diagonals bisect each other. Now we're going to add to that the fact that rectangles do have 90-degree angles and your diagonals are congruent. So here we've got our 90-degree angles there and the diagonals are congruent. And since they bisect each other, we also get the parts of the diagonals to be congruent to each other as well. Okay, so now let's go ahead and use that information to help us figure out some missing parts here of the rectangle. Okay, so here we go. So we're looking for the angle WXZ. So WXZ is this angle here. And if the big angle at angle X is 90 degrees and part of it's 50, the other part has to be 40. And I just kind of thought to myself, hey, what plus 50 will give me 90? Or you can look at it as 90 minus 50 will give you the 40. We're now also looking for angle WPX. So there's a couple ways to get here. So because we know the diagonals are equal and they bisect each other, we know that these two sides are congruent, which creates an isosceles triangle. Now you kind of have to think back to our triangle unit to know what to do with that. So when we have congruent legs and isosceles triangle, your base angles are congruent. So this angle is 40 in addition to this angle being 40. All three angles in a triangle do add up to 180. So 40 plus 40 is 80, which would make the other angle equal to 100. Alrighty, we are also told that XZ is 12, and we're looking for the length of PY. So if XZ is 12, WY is 12, which would make PY half of that, or 6, since we know the diagonals bisect each other. Alrighty, so I've got to erase this because it's going to show up on the next screen if I don't. So let me erase these real quick. Okay, next up, we're going to be moving on to squares. Okay, so property of squares are very cool. They have all the properties of every single parallelogram, every single one. So your opposite sides are equal, your opposite sides are parallel, all the sides are equal. Your diagonals bisect each other. They are perpendicular like in the rhombus. They bisect these angles like in a rhombus. Your diagonals are also congruent like in a rectangle, and squares happen to have 90-degree angles here at the corners like a rectangle. So the squares are really cool in that every single property that we've learned about, squares have. Alrighty, so let's go ahead and use that knowledge. Okay, so we know that EH is 5, and then we're going to find everything else. So GHF, we know that squares have perpendicular diagonals, which would make that angle 90 degrees. DGH, we're looking for just this part. We know that this whole angle is 90 degrees because it's a square, and these diagonals bisect the angles, so half of 90 has to be 45. Now, HF, to figure out HF, we know that EH is 5, which would make the whole thing 10. This diagonal is going to be congruent to that one. So HF would also have to be 5. Now, segment DE, we would need to use Pythagorean theorem. And we're going to do Pythagorean theorem next unit, so you won't have to do that one. So there are your properties of a square. If you have any questions, please message me when you're working on your classwork tomorrow. And this presentation will be up into your into Schoology as well. Have a great rest of your day.